Yes, Bruce, there's an Ant-Man and a Spider-Man. Anyone remember the days when we all laughed at the mere thought of an Ant-Man movie? And now look at him. He's out there with Cap and Tony, saving the world with pym particles in Endgame, using the quantum realm to bring everyone back from the snap of Infinity Stones, and, well, you get the point. I think it's pretty safe to say that this movie worked. Big time. You know the drill. Click away if you don't want to be spoiled. 2015, a strange year for Marvel, where they simultaneously released their biggest and their smallest, quite literally, films a couple months apart. Ironically, they did the exact same thing in 2018 with Infinity War and Ant-Man and the Wasp. And you know, it really does seem to be working. People throw around this idea that Ant-Man and the Ant-Man franchise is a palate cleanser for these bigger, heavier Avengers films, but I think that's such an accurate term because this movie really is such a breath of fresh air from the huge, city-exploding, psychopathic, robot-centric MCU films, specifically Age of Ultron in that case. First of all, Paul Rudd. You know, the idea of, well, you can watch any movie with the Avengers in it because it would probably just be that entertaining. Multiply that by 10 with Paul Rudd in anything. Guys, I don't think we quite understand just how much of a national treasure Paul Rudd is. I don't think I even did before rewatching this movie. But now, I know that Paul Rudd is phenomenal. He somehow manages to be absolutely hilarious while also being lovable and goofy, and yet being so heartfelt at the same time, which is just incredible. Seriously, I cannot overstate how much of this movie rides on Paul Rudd. I'd even go so far to say that in a film like Thor or Captain America the First Avenger, they might have worked alright with a different actor. Though don't hold that to me now because of course we love Hemsworth and Evans, but the first Ant-Man? I think it literally could not have worked with any other actor. That's about the highest compliment I can give this movie. I genuinely think Rudd is one of the top 5 cast MCU actors. Enough said. One thing this film does lack is complexity. While I'm only about halfway through the Infinity Saga, I'd wager that this is pretty easily the simplest MCU film. I mean, compare the plot of this movie to The Winter Soldier, which is just all tied up in knots. This movie has an extremely simple plot. It's a heist movie, although the heist itself isn't that interesting, but I digress. And literally, it's just as simple as moving from point A to point B to point C. And that can be a good or bad thing, depending on the film. The simpler a film's story is, the easier it is for the audience to see the inherent flaws or strengths of the movie. And in this case, I think it illuminates both pretty quickly, although I will make the case that this movie has significantly more to enjoy than to dislike. Starting off with something that's rather neutral in my eyes to maybe a little bit positive, I think Peyton Reed, who famously or infamously, depending on who you are, replaced Edgar Wright as a director, does an absolutely average job with the movie. I haven't seen enough for him to know his definitive style, but I certainly wouldn't be able to tell you what it was just from watching this movie. In contrast, I can watch Thor Ragnarok without having watched anything else Taika Waititi has done and just know exactly what his style is. It's pretty generic in most respects, except maybe the inventive action sequences and humor, and all things considered, I think that's totally fine. An Ant-Man movie didn't necessarily need to break the boundaries of filmmaking anyways. And then we come to everyone's new favorite segment from Access Blockbusters, Bash the MCU Villain, where, you guessed it, I bash the MCU villain. I think Marvel had to scramble after they let go of Edgar Wright and come up with a new story, and in the process, they went back to their formula, so to speak. And this time, they pulled from their most successful origin story, that being Iron Man. Because a lot of this movie is quite blatantly reflective of Iron Man, in some interesting ways, most notably the villain. Yellow Jacket is a clear ripoff of Ironmonger. Let me give you a rundown and you tell me what the villain is. A charismatic CEO type who wants control of the company, but someone else is standing in their way because they have a piece of tech that they really want, so they decide to build their own version of that tech and try to maniacally, for some idiotic reason, destroy everything and blow up something and try to murder the hero. Which villain is that? To be honest, I don't even know. Could be either one. Again, to Corey Stoll's credit, I don't hate his performance as Darren Cross. He's somewhat charismatic and likable, although he flips from being good-natured and really upset on a dime, especially when he, literally vaporizes someone for no reason in the bathroom. And the only explanation that's given is, the pym particles kind of make you crazy, and also he gets electrocuted in a flycatcher, I guess. The backstory is there on paper, vaguely, with him feeling betrayed by his mentor Hank Pym, but I mean, come on. In the end, he's just screaming about trying to murder Scott, and it just devolves into chaos. I will say, though, to the movie's credit, the action is super clever and inventive. This is a superhero that's not going to punch you in the face like Cap or blast you like Iron Man. And to Peyton Reed's credit, he does an incredible job showcasing the action from a different point of view. The sequence in the briefcase is really fun. I quite enjoy how they're just throwing random oversized objects at each other, like keys that are, normal size to regular people. And of course, the action scene on the Thomas the Tank Engine track is genius. Well done in that regard, Peyton Reed. Man, can I say the Avengers compound scene is one of my absolute favorite in this movie, as well as in the entire MCU. Falcon was the perfect Avenger to bring in, and yes, people joke that he was the biggest one that they could afford for this movie, but not only does this seamlessly tie into Civil War, but it's so unbelievably fun. Falcon works so well because he's a tech-based hero, so Scott being able to mess with his pack is just so great. And it's not like the Avengers where the heroes are literally trying to beat each other senseless, because those feel rather tense and dramatic, and they don't really fit well with a movie like this. This just feels like a friendly skirmish, and I love that. Also, the way that they integrate the Avengers compound, beautiful. Although, should Hank Pym have known about this? Probably. It probably should have been all over the news that the Avengers were relocating, but no big deal, that's just a nitpick, because the reveal of the Avengers compound the first time you see this movie is genuinely surprising in a delightful way. Speaking of Hank Pym, let's talk cast. Evangeline Lilly is likable enough as Hope Van Dyne, although she admittedly is a little too uptight in some scenes. I think she's a little more likable in the sequel, but we'll get to that in 8 movies? And talk about getting an A-lister. Would anyone 10 years ago believe that the legendary Michael Douglas would be in a film called Ant-Man? I dare you to find that person. But really, the all-stars come from Scott's team. Michael Pena is gold, as well as Dave and Kurt. We all love Michael Pena's narration, and I would absolutely love to see him narrate the snap in Ant-Man 3, because that would be just brilliant. They're fun companions for Scott, and they're just welcome additions to any scenes. And that's what really works about this movie. This movie is genuinely funny. The other MCU films have humor, certainly, but this film is the first to border on being a true comedy, and I think it's the funniest MCU until Thor Ragnarok. The jokes are organic, they don't feel cheap or sitcom-y, the Baskin-Robbins joke is iconic, and it doesn't feel gimmicky at all. It's just so organically woven into the movie. The entire sequence at the end with Dave and Kurt trying to get around Paxton in the van, that's awesome, and yes, the giant the Thomas the Tank Engine is great as well. What Peyton Reed does do well is use the environment around him to his advantage. This movie is unabashedly Ant-Man, and they utilize the small spaces and new surroundings to the fullest, which I absolutely love about this movie. I also just have to commend Marvel on a small thing I mentioned a little bit earlier. The way that these films interweave while remaining their own unique, independent films is insane to me. Ant-Man has the Avengers compound from Age of Ultron, and Civil War has Sam recruiting Scott from Ant-Man, and then Homecoming directly is tied to Civil War, and Ragnarok has Doctor Strange in there. This is where Marvel really began leaning into character combinations and their shared universe, and I think all the better for it. It works fantastically. But at the center of this movie is an emotional core so strong that it carries the entire film, because underneath all the comedy and the jokes and the silly action is heart. It's a term that I've been throwing around in the past few MCU reviews if you've seen them, but I think it's really important to track this, because this is when Marvel movies really began to tap into the emotional side of the audience, and in this movie, it's Scott and his daughter Cassie. Without that angle, this movie doesn't work. Scott has no reason to do what he does, but with his daughter, it makes Scott such a strong character and it gives him reasons to do what he's doing because he cares about his daughter, which is just fantastic. Bravo, Abby Ryder-Fortson, you gave one of the most adorable MC performances, and without this character, this movie doesn't work. What's left of the film is admittedly fairly generic. The training montage is fun, albeit a little bland. The story, like I mentioned before, is extremely simple. The moments where Hank and Hope reconcile over Janet's supposed death, they feel a little awkward and only broken up by Rudd's brilliant comedic timing. But I'm telling you, I can watch Paul Rudd do almost anything for 2 hours. He's one of the most underrated actors in the MCU, and I cannot stress that enough. In the end, Ant-Man may not be as gritty and grounded as Iron Man, as complex as The Winter Soldier, as bold as Guardians, but it's just such an entertaining film. Unlike another film that's just entertaining for 2 hours like Age of Ultron, which is pretty hollow admittedly, Ant-Man manages to do something more. It manages to be entertaining while also maintaining its emotional core. I think that's what sets this movie apart from the rest. I'm going to give Ant-Man a B+ and an 8.7 out of 10.
It's really important to me that Cap never finds out about this.
Baskin-Robbins always finds out.
Comment down below with your thoughts on the first Ant-Man film. Phase 2's wrapped up now, and I'll be doing a Phase 2 recap video very soon, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, look forward to the next review, which is a big one, Civil War. Subscribe and give this video a like to support the channel, and if you want to check out some more content, check out the videos on the screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.